In the cold darkness of Westminster Abbey's royal vault, a lead coffin lay undisturbed for centuries, guarding secrets that would curdle the blood of even the most seasoned historian. When investigators finally breached the tomb of Elizabeth I, England's legendary Virgin Queen, they unearthed a reality far more unsettling than any macabre fantasy. The mighty monarch who had defied kings, vanquished the Spanish Armada, and ruled with unyielding resolve, had been reduced to a grotesque parody of her former self, a chilling testament to the brutal realities of royal death in Tudor England. The year was 1603, and England's golden age was drawing to its final, agonizing close. Elizabeth I lay dying in Richmond Palace. For weeks she had refused to recline, standing for hours on end, her mind besieged by terrors of what awaited her beyond the veil. Her courtiers whispered that she was haunted by visions of her own putrefaction, of the savage indignities that would be inflicted upon her body once her spirit had fled. What lay in wait for them centuries later proved her premonitions were not mere imaginings, but grim prophecies fulfilled. The discovery within her coffin exposed a horrifying truth about royal death, a truth meticulously scrubbed from the annals of history. The embalming process she had endured was nothing short of ritualized dismemberment, a gruesome procedure performed while the life still lingered within her. Her internal organs had been wrenched from her torso, her brain meticulously extracted through her nasal passage, and her emptied husk stuffed with spices and herbs, like some grotesque parody of a festive bird. But the true horror lay in the cruelly ironic arrangement of her final resting place. Looming above her decaying remains resided the coffin of her half-sister, Mary I, the very woman Elizabeth had both feared and ultimately supplanted. In death, these embittered rivals were stacked like lifeless timber, their royal blood offering no sanctuary from the inevitable feast of worms. The woman who had commanded armies and inspired poets had been reduced to a mere concatenation of chemical reactions, slowly dissolving in the fetid mire of her own bodily fluids. This is not merely a chronicle of royal demise, it is a plunge into the abyss of monarchy itself, where the divine right of kings collides with the stark inevitability of decomposition. The findings within that tomb challenge everything we thought we knew about Elizabeth I's final days and the barbaric customs that enshrouded royal death in Tudor England. The revelations were so profoundly disturbing that they were actively suppressed for decades, deemed too visceral for public consumption. Prepare yourself for a descent into this nightmare of royal mortality. Brace yourself for descriptions that will shatter your preconceived notions of history's most celebrated monarch. The gilded mask of majesty concealed a face of putrefaction, and the scepter of power possessed no dominion over the inexorable tide of decay. What befell Elizabeth I's body after death lays bare unsettling truths about power, mortality, and the savage traditions that lurked beneath the shimmering veneer of England's golden age. Tonight, we breach the vault of secrets that Westminster Abbey has silently guarded for over 4 centuries. What emerges from that sepulchral darkness will irrevocably alter your perception of the Virgin Queen and the ghastly realities of royal death. For ultimately, even the most formidable sovereign is but flesh and bone, subjected to the same inescapable laws that govern us all. March 24th, 1603, Richmond Palace stood enshrouded in an unsettling silence as Elizabeth I breathed her last. The woman who had steered England for 45 years was departing this world as she had lived, on her own terms, upright, steadfastly refusing to surrender, even to the clutches of death. For days, she had remained on her feet, her ladies-in-waiting propping up her failing form, convinced that once she assumed a horizontal position, she would never rise again. Here was a queen who had confronted the Spanish Armada with unwavering resolve, who had signed the death warrant of Mary, Queen of Scots, and who had navigated the treacherous currents of European politics with unmatched skill. Yet, in her final hours, she was reduced to a frail, frightened old woman, desperately grasping at the fading phantoms of power slipping through her gnarled fingers. Her face, once immortalized in countless portraits and poems, had metamorphosed into a grotesque mask of white lead paint and vermilion, cracking and flaking as her body succumbed. Dr. John Manningham, who attended her deathbed, would later record the horrifying transformation that engulfed the Queen. Her body had begun to swell grotesquely with dropsy, her limbs ballooning with accumulated fluid. Her renowned red hair, long since faded to gray and concealed beneath elaborate wigs, had fallen out in clumps. Most disturbing of all, she had contracted what physicians termed the royal disease, a suppurating abscess in her throat that rendered swallowing impossible and suffused her mouth with the acrid taste of her own corruption. The Queen's deep-seated paranoia concerning her post-mortem treatment was not unfounded. She had witnessed firsthand the gruesome fate of royal bodies after death. She had beheld the butchered remains of her own mother, Anne Boleyn, hastily crammed into an arrow chest after her brutal execution. She had heard of her father, Henry VIII, whose corpse had exploded within its coffin, violently breaching lead and wood in a final corpulent assertion of his earthly dominion. These ghastly images haunted her waking hours, and she had expressly forbidden any tampering with her mortal remains. Yet, the machinery of royal death was inexorably set in motion. Even as she swayed precariously on her swollen feet, the embalmers were already preparing their instruments of their grisly trade. The sergeant surgeon had meticulously assembled his kit: razor-sharp knives for the abdominal incision, long metal rods for the extraction of the brain, hooks for evisceration, and capacious buckets for the copious blood and bodily fluids that would soon gush from the royal cadaver. The court maintained a pretense of normalcy even as their sovereign decomposed before their very eyes. Courtiers persisted in presenting petitions to a queen who was no longer capable of speech. Musicians played somber melodies in the presence chamber while their monarch stood motionless, her eyes glazed with pain and dread. When she finally collapsed on March 23rd, it was met with a collective, albeit unspoken, sense of relief. James VI of Scotland was already hastening south to claim his inheritance, and the courtiers who had sworn undying fealty were already calculating their prospects within the impending regime. Elizabeth I breathed her last, alone, at 3:00 a.m. on March 24, 1603, abandoned by all save a handful of loyal servants who remained out of obligation rather than affection. The instant Elizabeth's heart ceased to beat, her body ceased to be her own. Within moments, the Lord Chamberlain issued the fateful signal, and a macabre transformation commenced. The corpse was stripped bare, revealing a body ravaged by age, disease, and the insidious effects of toxic cosmetics. What the embalmer beheld shocked even those seasoned professionals, hardened by years of exposure to the realities of death. Her skin, beneath layers of white lead paint, was a landscape of sores and lesions. The makeup she had worn for decades had slowly poisoned her, eroding her flesh from the inside out. Her face, devoid of its cosmetic facade, presented a skull barely sheathed in translucent skin. Her celebrated aquiline nose was now a beak-like protrusion, her lips drawn back to expose blackened teeth, worn down to mere stumps. The embalming process that followed was an exercise in medieval barbarity. The sergeant surgeon initiated the procedure with a deep incision just beneath the ribcage, slicing through layers of fat and muscle with practiced efficiency. The stench that erupted from the body cavity was overwhelming, a noxious blend of decay, infection, and the peculiar sweetness of royal flesh nurtured by a lifetime of lavish food and wine. Attendants hastened to burn incense, but nothing could fully mask the repugnant odor of decaying majesty. One by one, the organs were extracted. The heart was discovered to be enlarged and diseased. The liver, engorged with fatty deposits, bore witness to countless opulent banquets. Each organ was scrutinized meticulously, as court physicians believed they could glean the secrets of her reign from her entrails. Whispers circulated regarding the possibility of poison, while others noted abnormalities within her virgin womb, the organ that had been the subject of so much speculation throughout her lifetime. The extraction of their brain was particularly gruesome. Employing a long metal rod inserted through the nasal cavity, the embalmer breached the cribriform plate and commenced the liquefaction of the royal brain. What emerged was not the seat of the brilliant mind that had outmaneuvered Europe's most powerful rulers, but a putrid gray mass that splattered onto the stone floor. Despite their professional detachment, attendants were observed to gag and avert their gazes. With the body cavity and skull now emptied, the embalmer initiated the preservation process. The hollowed corpse was washed with wine and vinegar, then packed with myrrh, frankincense, aloes, and sawdust to absorb any remaining fluids. The incision was crudely sewn shut with thick thread, leaving visible stitches across the royal abdomen. The face was meticulously rebuilt using wax and plaster, creating a death mask that bore only a superficial resemblance to the living queen. A new red wig was placed upon the skull, and the body was dressed in magnificent robes of state. From a distance, she might have appeared to be sleeping. Up close, however, the illusion was horrifying. A waxen effigy stuffed with spices, masquerading as England's greatest monarch. The state funeral was a carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to reinforce the sacrosanct power of the monarchy. But beneath the pageantry lurked disturbing secrets. The body within the magnificent effigy parading through the streets of London was already undergoing decomposition, despite the embalmer's best efforts. Witnesses recounted hearing strange noises, gurgling and hissing sounds emanating from chemical reactions within the lid-lined casket. The pervasive stench of putrefaction, barely masked by incense, followed the procession like an unwelcome specter. Robert Cecil meticulously oversaw every detail. The coffin, draped in purple velvet and surmounted by an eerily lifelike effigy, was drawn by 4 black-draped horses. Behind it marched the nobility of England, their faces composed, their minds calculating their prospects in the new regime. Citizens lined the streets, weeping genuine tears, oblivious to the grotesque reality concealed beneath the royal pall. The journey to Westminster Abbey consumed 4 long hours, during which the spring sun relentlessly accelerated the chemical processes within the coffin. The spices and preservatives reacting with leaking bodily fluids produced a toxic brew, generating pressure within the sealed container. Attendants were compelled to discreetly puncture the lead on several occasions to release the accumulated gases, hastily resealing the holes before anyone detected the telltale hiss. Dr. Anthony, Dean of Westminster, who presided over the burial ceremony, later confessed in private correspondence the sheer horror he experienced while standing near the coffin. He could distinctly hear unholy sounds of corruption emanating from within. The beautiful effigy above seemed to mock the ghastly reality concealed below. While the wax figure portrayed Elizabeth in her prime, the thing within the coffin was rapidly dissolving into its constituent elements. The burial was conducted with unseemly haste. As the coffin was lowered into the vault, witnesses reported hearing a distinct crack, either the lead giving way or the decomposing body shifting within. The speed with which the vault was sealed suggested that those in charge were anxious to contain a potential disaster. Elizabeth was interred in the same vault as her half-sister, Mary Bird, Bloody Mary, the Catholic queen whom Elizabeth had succeeded. The 2 sisters, bitter rivals in life, were condemned to share eternity within a narrow stone chamber. The immediate aftermath saw a series of strange occurrences, fueling rumors of supernatural disturbance. Abbey workers reported hearing unsettling sounds from within the royal vault, not just the sounds of decomposition, but what some described as scratching or knocking. The official explanation was rats, but those who had been present at the burial knew better. Gases accumulating within the poorly embalmed corpse caused the lead coffin to buckle and groan, generating sounds that were almost human in their desperation. For 265 years, the vault remained sealed, its contents consigned to the realm of imagination and nightmares. But in 1868, Victorian curiosity prompted Dean Arthur Stanley to order the royal vault opened once again. What the investigators discovered that October morning would haunt them for the remainder of their days and provide chilling confirmation of centuries-old rumors. The initial challenge was locating Elizabeth's coffin. When workers breached the floor of the Henry VII Chapel, they were confronted with a scene of utter chaos. Water had seeped in over the centuries, and the noble dead lay in varying states of dissolution. Coffins had collapsed, and remains were mingled in a grotesque democracy of decay, recognizing no earthly rank or distinction. Dean Stanley's suppressed account paints a vivid picture of Gothic horror. The stench, he wrote, was beyond description, not merely the scent of ancient death, but something more active, as if decomposition had been suspended, not completed. The investigation team, equipped with rudimentary breathing apparatus, descended into what Stanley termed a charnel house of monarchy. Elizabeth's coffin was located beneath that of Mary. Both caskets had partially collapsed under their own weight and the accumulated pressure of centuries. The lead had oxidized and split, offering fleeting glimpses of the horrors within. Through one such fissure, investigators glimpsed purple velvet lining, now blackened with age and moisture, clinging to shapes that might once have resembled human forms. When the team attempted to lift Mary's coffin to gain access to Elizabeth's, they made a shocking discovery. The two coffins had begun to merge over time. The relentless pressure had fused the lead at the points of contact. The erstwhile enemy queens had become literally inseparable in death. Workers were forced to employ metal saws to separate them, unleashing a fresh wave of horrors as the movement disturbed the contents of both coffins. The interior of Elizabeth's coffin exceeded their worst expectations. The embalming process had created a unique microenvironment in which spices and herbs had combined with bodily fluids to form a black, tar-like substance that preserved some tissues while completely dissolving others. What remained was a horrifying amalgamation of mummified flesh, dissolved organs, and crystallized embalming materials. The state of the skull was particularly shocking. The reconstructed face had collapsed inward, the wax and plaster melting and mingling with the decomposing flesh. The red wig had fared surprisingly well, creating a grotesque contrast, vibrant, artificial hair crowning a partially dissolved skull. The jaw had become detached, still bearing the stumps of blackened teeth. The investigation revealed that the embalming process had paradoxically accelerated certain aspects of decay while simultaneously arresting others. The removal of the organs had created voids within the body cavity and skull. When sealed, the putrefactive gases and fluids could not escape. Thus, a pressure cooker began, where the body essentially stewed in its own juices for centuries, causing tissues to break down and reconstitute in horrifying, unfamiliar forms. The coronation ring, which legend claimed had been sawn from her swollen finger at the time of death, lay loose among the scattered bones. Fragments of fabric had fused to the remaining skin, creating a macabre patchwork that defied separation. The golden orb and scepter lay tarnished, corroded by the acids of royal decomposition. Most disturbing of all was the palpable evidence that decomposition remained an active process. When exposed to the air, tissues began to deteriorate rapidly, as if compensating for centuries of suspended animation. Investigators watched in stunned silence as what had appeared to be stable remains crumbled before their eyes. The Virgin Queen was dying a second death, witnessed by Victorian gentlemen who had believed themselves to be prepared for anything. The team worked swiftly to document their findings before resealing the vault. Sketches were made, measurements taken, and samples collected. Dean Stanley's final note speaks volumes. "We have gazed upon the face of mortality and found it wearing a crown. Would that we had left it undisturbed." The discovery triggered a crisis among those involved. Victorian society, with its elaborate mourning rituals and its unwavering belief in the dignity of death, was confronted with irrefutable evidence that even the most exalted monarchs were subject to grotesque decomposition. Dr. William Hartley, the anatomist who examined the remains, wrote in his personal journal of nightmares that plagued him for years afterward. Chemical analyses revealed deeply unsettling details. The concoction within the coffin had produced unique compounds, existing nowhere else in nature, that possessed antimicrobial properties, selectively preserving certain tissues while accelerating the decay of others. Elizabeth's body had become a laboratory for bizarre chemical reactions, creating substances that Victorian science could not fully comprehend. The signs showed the body had undergone multiple stages of decomposition and partial preservation, not a simple progression from flesh to bone, but evidence of having decomposed, partially mummified, liquefied, and reformed multiple times. The sealed environment had disrupted normal decay, leading to what Hartley termed recursive putrefaction. The psychological impact on Dean Stanley was profound. His later sermons focused increasingly on the transience of earthly glory. He forbade any further opening of royal vaults during his tenure and left explicit instructions for his own simple burial. The findings also raised uncomfortable questions regarding other royal burials. If Elizabeth, who had received the era's most elaborate embalming, had decomposed so grotesquely, what fate had befallen the others? Scientific analysis revealed that the vault's atmosphere contained high concentrations of methane, hydrogen sulfide, and other unidentified compounds resulting from centuries of royal decay. Some investigators reported feeling unwell and experiencing hallucinations while within the vault. Although photography was by then available, Stanley forbade its use. Some horrors, he argued, should not be preserved for posterity. artists created heavily censored sketches, one of which, locked away in the Abbey archives, depicts a human form melted and reformed like candle wax, crowned with a wig whose curl remains intact while all beneath dissolves. Queen Victoria was deeply disturbed by the sanitized reports she received. She ordered sweeping changes to royal funeral practices, mandating simpler embalming procedures and swifter burials. The medical community was similarly shaken, leading to a complete overhaul of mortuary science aimed at preventing recursive putrefaction in sealed environments. Among the artifacts recovered from the vault was a small lead box containing what investigators believed to be Elizabeth's heart, transformed into a crystalline substance, a unique amalgamation of lead, mercury, and organic materials fused at a molecular level. The Virgin Queen's heart had become a toxic jewel, beautiful and horrifying in equal measure. This led to the search for other organs, which were traditionally buried separately. When containers found beneath the chapel floor, the search found these containers had leaked over the centuries, creating a pool of royal essence seeping into the foundations. The very stones of Westminster Abbey had absorbed the liquid remains of monarchy. Workers recounted how certain stones, when struck, would weep a dark fluid redolent of ancient spices and decay. Lord Salisbury ordered all official records pertaining to the investigation classified for a period of 100 years. But inevitably, the truth seeped out, like the fluids from those decaying lead containers. The Gothic revival movement suddenly confronted the ghastly realities of medieval death. Modern analysis of the surviving documentation reveals even more disturbing details. The embalming process involved the use of substances now known to be highly toxic, including mercury, lead, and arsenic compounds, creating a poisonous environment within the coffin. Elizabeth had been transformed into a toxic waste site. In her lifetime, Elizabeth had declared, "I may have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king." In death, she possessed neither. Her heart had crystallized into a toxic gem, and her stomach had dissolved into a chemical soup. Every triumph, every victory had been achieved by beings who would inevitably meet the same fate as their queen, dissolved, decomposed, and forgotten, save as chemical stains upon stone. The investigation yielded one final surprise. Amidst the debris within the vault, investigators unearthed fragments of parchment, documents that had been buried with the queen. One fragment bearing Elizabeth's own handwriting had survived. "I dread not death, for it makes all equal." The irony is profound. She had indeed been rendered equal to every corpse that had ever rotted. As we contemplate Elizabeth's fate, we are compelled to consider its implications for our own mortality. The Tudor queen, who had possessed everything, ended her days as a mere chemical reaction within a lead box. No amount of glory could have prevented it. No achievement could have forestalled it. The embalming process, intended to preserve her for eternity, had merely engendered new and uniquely grotesque forms of decay. In attempting to cheat death, she had only succeeded in making it more horrifying. Modern forensic science offers new insights into this macabre process. The sealed container, in combination with the embalming chemicals, had generated adipocere, a waxy substance formed from body fats. However, Elizabeth's adipocere was unlike any previously studied. Her royal diet, the toxic cosmetics she had used, the unique embalming materials employed, and the hermetically sealed environment had all conspired to create a substance that defied easy categorization. Neither mummy nor skeleton, but something uniquely horrific. This dissolution extends even to our perception of the historical Elizabeth herself. Awareness of her physical fate inevitably colors our understanding of her achievements. Can we truly appreciate her speeches about possessing the heart of a king without imagining that crystallized heart? Can we admire the Armada portrait without envisioning the face beneath, collapsed within its leaden sarcophagus? Contemporary attitudes toward death have been profoundly influenced by this grim discovery, though few realize it. The modern preference for cremation, the rise of natural burials, and the increasing aversion to elaborate embalming practices can all be traced, in part, to the horror of excessively preserving the dead. Elizabeth's fate serves as a potent warning against the hubris of attempting to cheat death through science. Westminster Abbey remains one of London's most popular tourist destinations, with millions of visitors walking above the royal vaults each year. The building promotes itself as a monument to British achievement, carefully avoiding any mention of the decomposed reality that underlies its magnificent fad. Every prayer that is uttered within its hallowed halls rises through air subtly flavored by the gases of putrefying monarchy. The building itself is a tomb, not only containing the dead, but constructed from them. The final irony: Elizabeth, who had harbored such profound anxieties about what would happen to her after death, was, in a sense, absolutely right. Everything she had dreaded had come to pass, and worse, the embalmers whom she had sought to avoid had ultimately triumphed. The physical dissolution she had so desperately fought to prevent had claimed her with particular vengeance. The privacy she had so fiercely guarded had been violated by Victorian investigators who gazed upon her most intimate decay. Yet perhaps there is a strange triumph to be found within this horror. Elizabeth achieved a form of immortality through the very grotesqueness of her fate. Other monarchs are remembered for their accomplishments. Elizabeth is remembered for what she became. The sheer horror of her decomposition ensures that she will never be forgotten. She achieved eternity not through preservation, but through putrefaction. As we close the vault on this macabre tale, we are left with a series of haunting images: the crystallized heart, the dissolved flesh, the toxic concoction of spice and rot, the lead coffin transformed into a chemical reactor. But above all, we are left with the unsettling realization that beneath the stones of sacred spaces, behind the facades of cherished institutions, lies the same horror, the same inevitable, democratic, and utterly human process of returning to the elements from which we came. The vault remains sealed today, its contents continuing their slow chemical transformation in the darkness. But we, who now know the truth, can never walk those halls again without being acutely aware of what lies beneath. Every footstep presses upon dissolved monarchy. Every breath we take contains atoms that were once Elizabeth. She is both gone and everywhere, absent yet omnipresent, transformed into the very atmosphere and stone that were intended to memorialize her. In seeking to preserve her, they had rendered her eternal, not as they had intended, but as nature had decreed, dissolved, dispersed, and forever woven into the very fabric of the place meant to commemorate her. What they found inside Elizabeth I's coffin was, indeed, far more horrifying than anyone had imagined, not just because of the physical grotesqueness of the discovery, but because it revealed a fundamental truth about the human condition: that all power, all glory, and all achievement ultimately end the same way. Within that lead box lay not just a dead queen, but the death of illusions, the decomposition of dreams, and the putrefaction of all human pretense. She had built an age of gold, but had become base metal and decay. She had been Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, and the mother of her nation. In the end, she was only chemistry, and chemistry recognizes no rank. The profound horror lies not in what death did to Elizabeth, but in what it reveals about life itself. Every moment of glory is enacted by beings who will inevitably end as she did. We build monuments, craft legacies, and achieve triumphs, all the while carrying within us the seeds of our own grotesque dissolution. We are all future chemical reactions, simply waiting to happen. Elizabeth's story compels us to confront this reality without the comforting illusion of permanence. If it happened to her, with all the resources and determination at her disposal to avoid it, what hope is there for anyone else? None, of course. But perhaps in accepting this horror, in confronting it directly as those Victorian investigators did, we can find a strange and unsettling peace. For the horror of Elizabeth's fate is also its democracy. She, who had held herself apart from the common mass of humanity, was proven to be utterly and inescapably human. The concept of divine appointment meant nothing to the biological processes that claimed her body, just as they claimed the bodies of her humblest subjects. In death, she achieved the equality that she had rejected in life. The lead coffin, which was intended to separate her from common burial, instead created a unique horror that surpassed ordinary decomposition. The investigators who opened that vault in 1868 performed an unintended service to humanity. They peered into the abyss of our common fate and reported their findings. Their horror becomes our knowledge, and their trauma becomes our education. We cannot unknow what they discovered, and we cannot return to our comfortable illusions about death and dignity. Elizabeth's fate has torn away the veil, revealing the skulls that lie beneath the skin of all human pretensions. We leave Elizabeth where she was found, in her lead coffin beneath Westminster Abbey, continuing her centuries-long transformation into elements and atoms. But we cannot leave behind the knowledge of what she became. It follows us out into our daily lives. Every reflection in the mirror shows not just the living face, but the skull it will one day become. Every achievement that we celebrate carries within it the seeds of its own decomposition. Every moment of life is shadowed by the knowledge of how it will end. Perhaps the horror of Elizabeth's fate serves as a necessary reminder of what we truly are. Not gods, not immortals, not beings separate from nature, but mere flesh and blood, subject to the same laws as all other organic matter. The queen, who had strived so mightily to be more than human, was proven to be utterly, grotesquely, and magnificently human. Her decomposition is our decomposition, her horror is our horror, and her fate is our fate. In death's democracy, we are all equal, reduced to the same chemical processes, and destined for our own lead coffins. What they found inside Queen Elizabeth I's coffin was far more horrifying than anyone had imagined. But the true horror lies not in the physical details, but in what it reveals about the human condition. We are all future corpses, eventual chemical reactions destined for unique and unknowable forms of decay. Elizabeth's fate makes visible what we all carry within us: death's democracy, which recognizes no rank, achievement, or glory. In the end, we are all equal in the grave, subject to the same processes that transformed Gloriana into a grotesque parody of her former self. The only difference is that her horror was witnessed and recorded, while ours will pass unobserved in the darkness that awaits us all. So, as we've journeyed into the depths of Westminster Abbey and uncovered the unsettling fate of Elizabeth I, I hope the takeaway isn't just about the macabre details. Really, it's about understanding that even the most powerful figures in history, those who seem larger than life, ultimately share the same destiny as the rest of us. It's a reminder of our shared humanity, our shared mortality, and the beautiful, humbling cycle of life and decay. What are your thoughts? Did anything in particular resonate with you from Elizabeth's story? I'd absolutely love to hear your comments, questions, or any reflections you might have. This is a fascinating and thought-provoking topic, and I'm eager to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into history's hidden corners, please consider subscribing. That way you won't miss out on any future explorations into the captivating and sometimes unsettling stories that history has to offer.